All right, welcome everyone. This is Healthy Families Raising the Next Generation Naturally. I'm Dr. Johnson. Welcome. I'm excited to be able to walk through these things. So we want to raise the next generation naturally. Let me tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll go ahead and walk through some information. So first of all, I've got my bachelor's in human biology and doctorate in chiropractic, and I spent a good portion of additional time training in the concept of what's called the 5 essentials, and I'll walk through those in just a little bit. And we work with a variety of families. We work through a variety of situations, being able to help them with a variety of things. And many they were told that there's not much that they could do, or there's some sort of medical intervention that for many people they just don't want to do. If they can avoid it, and which ultimately makes sense. And so we've been able to help with especially many children, which is a lot of the focus for tonight, is kids and relief for some of the issues that they've been dealing with. So we've all known somebody who's had ear infections. We know a kid who has had struggled with that. They get just ridiculous amounts of pain back up into their ear. And so that pressure backs up. It's excruciating. They're just screaming in pain. And man, as a parent, that is such a difficult time to really know what to do and how to help your child, especially with your first child. You've never been through this before. It's scary, scary stuff. But what you can begin to do as you walk through these things, you can realize that there are answers. There's things that you can do. And we've had kids come in. They get the upper cervical spine adjusted, begin to, in many cases, drain almost immediately some of that infection or resistance that's up in there. And then as you get those things opened up and realigned correctly and retrained, then for many kids, ear infections go away altogether. And that happens for many, but it comes down to finding the things that are interfering with the body's ability to heal itself. And so you could imagine, like, getting rid of ear infections, what that does for a child. Like, that completely changes their ability to be happy in those moments, and what that does for the tension in the home too. If mom and dad are stressed out, their relationship's gonna have a harder time there. Just everything in life changes when you can be relieved from situations like that. Children with constipation or colic. And I remember one time, my son was little, and he just had not gone for a couple of days, and so went to check his pelvis, its alignment, and opened that up, began to move. He had his sacrotuberous ligament right around the bottom portion of the sacrum, and just a little lift on that to move his sacrum, get his pelvis moving, and then began to release. And so just checking on it, pull his diaper off, and just see what's going on there. And so very quickly, I mean, within about a minute, check on it, and then just what looked like a cork release, and then lava flow. I'm like, put that diaper back on this kid and until he's done, and then we can clean him up. And so, I mean, feeling poorly, whether that be colic or constipation, and just kind of feeling lousy generally, is going to lead to behavioral issues. It makes it hard to focus for a child. And for many kids, they end up getting a diagnosis of things like ADD, ADHD. And so there are so many remedies, there's so many ways to address these things and to get help naturally. And so ultimately, we want to raise a generation of children that live empowered, know that they can make a difference in their health simply by the choices that they make. So let's get started. This whole concept of the 5 essentials really starts with a core of chiropractic. And that comes back to an understanding that the brain and spinal cord and the nerves that come out in between the individual bones control functions of the body. And we understand that the brain controls things. That's pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody really argues the fact that the brain controls things in the body. It's pretty simple. And so we just want to make sure that there's nothing interfering with or creating a problem in that communication, so the body can heal itself naturally. And then nutrition, because you are what you eat. You've probably heard that. And then the second part of that is that it is your fuel. So it is the thing that creates the energy in your life, as well as the physical structure that your body is made of. Then mindset, because what goes on up between your ears dictates what we do. And then oxygen and exercise, so that's our fitness. And we want to make sure that we get well oxygenated in our body, that we're getting good physical movement in. And then, of course, we want to minimize toxins, which is so rampant in our society. And so what's happened is that our world is just different now. I mean, we didn't have these type of things whenever I was a kid. But what we have now is many kids, even as early as age 8, are being recommended to be put on cholesterol drugs. It's just crazy. I mean, when you look at all of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease and all of this, the research in children, they're demonstrating some of these things at such a young age, more so than they really ever have. So typically speaking, in the medical field, in the medical world, they're going to recommend some sort of a medication, and so that becomes standard of care. But ultimately, I'd like to look a little bit deeper and see if we can find out why. If cholesterol is high in a child, then we need to find out why. So one of the things happening that's just so ridiculously different is that what we're finding now is that kids are starting to develop adult level of conditions, whether that be adult onset diabetes needing to be renamed to type 2 diabetes because it was starting to happen in children. And then even heart conditions. In this particular study in the New England Journal of Medicine, they looked at 200 children that were autopsied after being involved in fatal accidents. And in the autopsy, they opened them up, the children's coronary arteries, and then children between the ages of 2 and 15 already had fibrous plaquing in about 10% of the cases there. And that's kids. And in between the ages of 16 and 20, 35% of them. And in the mid-20s and over, 70% of them already had plaquing in their arteries. And so in children, this is just absolutely insane. So these are things to not know a little bit about. These are things to do everything we possibly can to avoid because it's just so rampant. Another revelation is just simply the amount of diagnoses of so many things anymore. When you look at autism, that used to be in 2000 it was 1 in 150, and then now it's 1 in 68. When you look at cancer rates from the 2010 census, we're going to be coming up in the next census in 2020. You can imagine where these numbers are headed. The American Cancer Society estimates that 75% of cancer is now due to environmental factors, which means that there is so much that we can begin to change. But when you look at it, 1 in 408 children will be diagnosed with cancer before the age of 15, and 1 in 285 will be diagnosed by the age of 20. And as an adult, they say that in a person's lifetime, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will get a diagnosis of cancer. So again, just stuff we need to really make sure that we understand what we can do, because so much of it is things that we can. The frequency of autoimmune conditions, any sort of immune-related issue, allergies, these things are just through the roof. And life expectancy of all things, for our children, like, this is craziness. Life expectancy has actually decreased for the 2nd year in a row. And so one thing to recognize is that healthy adults is going to lead to healthy kids. And so children, if you've ever paid attention, children are great imitators. So make sure that you give them something great to imitate. So set the tone for your family. I mean, we eat healthy, we work out, we get adjusted. It's part of our habits. And the reality is, if it's something to change that's hard for you, and you push it off, then what happens is you push it off for your child to have to learn in the same hard scenario that you are. You basically just push it off and make it hard for them later if you don't address it now. And so it really comes back to a question of what does their future look like? And that's when personally it really hit me and became real, as when I was looking at my little boy and I was holding him, just kind of thinking about the health of my future and his future and what that looks like. And I began to think about the rest of people in my family and what kind of problems that so many of them were dealing with, between blood sugar regulated issues, between pancreas issues, between heart problems, lung problems, gallbladder issues, thyroid problems, immune system problems. The list goes on, right? It's like how many people don't have some sort of a family history of something, and so it just becomes this moment when you begin to think about, oh my goodness, if I don't make the change that I see in my parents and grandparents, that's going to be my child. And that scared the heck out of me. And so I realized that I'm going to make the change. That I have to be the one to lead this for my son, because he doesn't know what this stuff is. I don't want to dump it on him later on in life for him to have to learn. So I've got to start making changes now so that he can begin to learn from what it is that we're doing. And we're not perfect by any means, and we've learned a ton over the last decade and a half. But we had to change so many things in our lives that we're talking about tonight. All this stuff are things that I didn't grow up with. I had to learn so much, and so my heart is to just be able to share what we've learned on our journey, so you can be empowered. You can learn some things and hopefully avoid some of the problems that we weren't able to avoid, and so we had to suffer through. Hopefully you don't have to. So as we go through it, the reality is that genetics, although that we're told genetics, it doesn't really mean genetic whenever something is in your family history. But the reality is that families learn most of their health habits from their family. So if family doesn't exercise, then you're probably not exercising until you become an adult and realize that you probably should. And so what happens is we have all these different things that we learn. We learn how to eat and when to eat and how much and what types of foods, and we learn whether to treat certain things with a medication, or how often to go to a doctor or not, or when to let a fever run its course. And how we learn to do things as a child carries over. And so the better we can make decisions now, all the difference it makes. And so ultimately it comes down to taking 100% responsibility for your life. Your genes are not your destiny, or your future family's destiny. The reality is that 70%, or in some estimations 90%, of disease simply comes down to lifestyle and your environment. There's this concept that's called epigenetics, and so that's the code above the code that turns genetics on or turns genetics off. So if you have a genetic marker for a particular illness, that does not necessarily mean that it's ever going to be expressed. However, if you don't change, then ultimately it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and your genetic code ends up being expressed in the same way. But if you completely change your lifestyle, you change your food, your fitness, your nerve system communication, and minimize toxins or detox some of those things that turn genes on, you can begin to completely change your health profile. Dr. Dean Ornish, you may have heard of his name, but he did a lot of studies in just diet and lifestyle, and he found that our lifestyle could literally turn on or turn off more than 500 genes that affect your health. So whether we can change it, ultimately means we can change a gene's expression, turn it on or turn it off. So that means we just, unfortunately, there goes our excuse. It's not just genetic anymore, because we actually can change virtually everything. There are some things that are truly genetic, but the vast majority of health issues, especially chronic ones in our society, are very much not. Very much not. So one of the things to recognize as we get started is that it really starts very, very young. And so most of the conversation for many parents and their children is all about the immune system, and how do I keep my kid from, quote, getting sick, by the definition that most people would call sick. A lot of this starts with the microbiome that's acquired at birth, and then by the age of 3, it's the same as an adult by that point. And most development of the immune system happens in the first 3 years of life, and it continues to early teenage years, and not really much beyond that point. But when we're born, we're actually born without any probiotic or microbiome structure. We're born essentially sterile when it comes to that conversation. So what happens, going through the birth canal, going through the vaginal canal, actually covers our body with a bacteria which will help to protect and work symbiotically with our body. It's kind of this probiotic gulp, if you will. And so mom may also, one of the problems, like even going through, may have had a normal vaginal birth for a child, but mom may actually not have even had a good microbiome to even pass on. And so ideally, what happens is mom takes care of herself, and then the baby gets that benefit, and we do the best that we can to go through the natural processes to get all of the natural benefit of that particular bacteria. So just a frame of reference, about 5,000 species of bacteria are going to live in our gut, which communicate with our brain and our immune system, and that's going to affect a variety of things in our health, including things like mood and behavior. In fact, 50% of dopamine and 90% of serotonin is actually made in the gut. And so important not only for your digestive system, but literally thinking, mood, and 70 to 80% of your immune system function, and of course your skin as well. If you have someone who has an eczema or psoriasis or skin-related issues, a lot of that stems back to the gut and the immune reactions that happen in there. And so what happens is, in many cases, the microbiome being out of its environment can hijack the signals that go to the brain, that gut-brain connection, through what's called the vagus nerve, not Las Vegas, that's a different Vegas, but the vagus nerve, it's part of your parasympathetic nerve system, controls a vast majority of the upper quadrant of your organs and things. But ultimately, that altered signal into the brain can even trigger cravings for bad foods and sugar and things that fuel the negative bacteria. And so one of the things that we want to do as far as influencing the immune system development and supporting the growth of the beneficial bacteria is mom's milk, and so breastfeeding. And so breastfeeding can actually support the growth of certain microbes influencing the immune system's development. And so antibodies to infection can actually be made in mom's body and passed through the milk to protect the baby as their immune system is developing. So literally, if a baby has an infection, mom's immune system actually begins to respond and develop antibodies for the baby. It's just incredible what can happen and what the body's ability to do is. And so ultimately, growing and building the immune system an awful lot like a muscle. We just have to practice and flex that muscle so it can begin to grow. And so there are so many things that are common in the immune system as far as disorders in children, all the way back to type 1 diabetes, asthma, allergies, hay fever, allergic dermatitis in the skin, eczema, food allergies, celiac disease, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or even cancer tie back to the immune system. Now, many of these things are very, very common nowadays, but they're absolutely not normal. So just several things can begin to happen in an adverse response to the microbiome in its situation. So for example, C-sections can actually do that because we don't get that probiotic structure from mom directly going through the canal. And so my intent here is not to make a mom feel bad. No, certainly not. But the reality of situations. So if we've gone through these things, what do we do, right? But so it starts with awareness, and then we do the best that we can. We make the choices the best that we possibly can for our kids. And then antibiotic use in the first 3 years of life. And so mom's use of antibiotics can actually destroy her microbiome, which can then be passed down to baby through the canal, just because the microbiome isn't as flourishing as what it would normally be. And antibiotics given to the child, and another situation, even in food, is antibiotics in the animals that we eat, as well as the constant use of hand sanitizer and antiseptics can absolutely damage those things as well. And so even on your skin, there is a probiotic layer of normal bacteria that's a protective layer even before things would reach your skin. And so it sounds a little strange, but actually having that layer of good beneficial bacteria is a protective layer even on your skin. So we don't want to wash off literally everything by using antibacterial soaps and sanitizers and those things like that. We end up robbing ourselves of that protective layer. And there's so many types of food that can create damage too. And one of the biggest ones literally is just sugar. And we're taking all the kinds of probiotics and things that help our gut. If you create a climate in your gut, so think of it like an ecosystem, that bad bacteria can really thrive on and be fueled with sugar. We don't want to set up an environment that they love, right? We don't want to set up an environment that feeds the negative microbes by feeding them sugar that they run on, versus a healthier environment where the sugar-loving bacteria simply wouldn't be able to thrive and survive. So there are other things that can begin to damage the environment, whether that be pesticides, hormones, fast food, packaged foods, hydrogenated oils, as well as artificial sweeteners. And there are certain formulas that have actually been found to increase intestinal permeability or leaky gut, if you've heard of that one. And rice cereals introduced when enzymes are not available to break those things down. So a rice cereal for a baby is really not a great thing to be starting with. But most of the time it's recommended because it's simple to break down. The problem is we just simply don't have a vast amount of the amylase that breaks it down. We produce small amounts of salivary amylase in the mouth, the enzyme that breaks it down as a newborn, and production increases the first few months, eventually reaching about 6 months of age before it can even do that. And so one of the problems too is just rice cereal breaks right down into sugar. And so we've got to just recognize that out. Now, there are foods that support. So food in whole form as much as possible. And there are even probiotic foods, like even yogurt. You can home make that. Goat milk yogurt, coconut milk yogurt, kefir, kombucha tea. For kids, just mix them up. You can even put them on ice. So simple things like that. Pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut, cultured foods, probiotic foods, things like that. And when you start introducing children to foods, introduce them to fruits and sugar-based foods. And when we do that, they will be more likely to gravitate them toward them later in life. So start off with good cultured foods. They'll be more likely to want to eat those things later on. So we want to start them off with the best foods that we possibly can, rather than introducing them to the sugars and the desserts and those sort of things early on. We should want to avoid it. And so very simply, if baby was born C-section or antibiotics happen, especially in the first 3 years, or any of the things that I talked about at this point are the situation, what in the world do I do, right? And so if the probiotic environment hasn't been rebuilt or built back up, naturally speaking, we just need to rebuild it with some sort of a probiotic support. And so the Max Kids probiotics powder is a very clean way to do that, with a prebiotic and then 6 billion CFU of probiotics per serving. And so super, super helpful to rebuild that for the kids. And so ultimately it's a good thing anyways to have a quality probiotic, especially if we've gone through some of those things that I already mentioned. Now, here's a different line of thinking when it comes to like fevers. If a child has a fever, the question ultimately is a fever good or bad? Well, here's the way to think about it. First, what is a fever, right? It should be emphasized that a fever is not an illness by itself, right? It's actually the body's healing response to create a homeostasis or balance. So a fever actually slows the growth and reproduction of bacteria and viruses, and a fever actually helps the body to recover more quickly from viral infections, although the fever may result in discomfort, obviously. If you've ever had a fever, you feel awful, but the body's actually fighting something off, and the body's actually doing its job. And it's important to understand that there is a purpose behind it, that there's a reason for it, that the body's intelligent and the body's in favor of life. It's never going to do anything to destroy itself. And so focusing on a child's general well-being, to know if it's an emergency. If they're tired but aware of what's going on, sometimes still playing and being silly and not responding, or versus not responding, or their eyes rolling back or extremely lethargic, those are completely different things. Now, 101 fever, 102 fever, and then even 103-degree fever that's not super long-term, are going to be normal fighting off of illness fevers and not necessarily an emergency. Now, obviously, if their eyes are rolling back, they become extremely lethargic, they're non-responsive, that's a crisis situation, and that's when reducing a fever makes sense. But outside of that, let the fever run its course. Even on the CDC website, you can take a look at those things. That the more often than not, we're just treating fevers way too quickly, and then unfortunately, what happens is that prolongs the illness, and it's allowed to get deeper because the fever is not the problem. The fever is part of the solution to the problem. And so just another couple of tips: keep hydrated, and so make sure that there's plenty of fluids in, and more than just water. Like even this is the old adage where chicken soup, the chicken soup is good for the soul, obviously, but chicken soup is good for illness because of the broth and the collagen and the minerals, and it's very alkalizing to the body. It's very helpful as a liquid to intake. And so, man, don't wake a sleeping child to give them a fever-reducing medication. And by the way, reducing their fever does not eliminate their ability to be contagious. Just think about that. Getting rid of the fever does not get rid of the problem, is the big mindset. And it interferes with what the body's doing to try and actually deal with the problem. And so bacteria double every 20 minutes in your body. And so just do not interfere with what your immune system's doing. If at all possible, avoid interfering and suppressing that. And so one other way that the immune system can be suppressed is sugar. So the question is, does sugar help or hurt the immune system? And you can probably take a wild guess. It doesn't help, right? And so sugar will immediately suppress the immune system's capacity, and suppresses it for up to 5 hours after consuming sugar. So a study done in Loma Linda University found white blood cells 40% less effective at killing germs when consuming 100 grams of sugar. And so when a kid's fighting something off, man, don't give them the candy, don't give them ice cream, don't give them the sugar, don't give in to that stuff. It'll help them feel better in the moment just because of sugar's pleasure response, but man, it makes the body's immune system crash. So just don't do that. Now, if you, for those of you who are watching, who are already in the office and you're already kids are getting adjusted, this is another good time, if they're fighting something off, to go ahead and bring them in, and so they can go ahead and get, if there's something interfering at all, if they're tightened up, or the atlas of the top bone has gotten stuck, or anything's out of positioning, go ahead and come in, get them adjusted, make sure the body's adaptation system is clear from any sort of interference so that it's responding at peak efficiency. And if you've never had your child's spine checked, I'd highly encourage you to do that. Don't wait till the sickness to have those things looked at. Just check on it, because there's so many things that begin to show up when you begin to take a look at the spine and check on it. There's so many things that develop without us really recognizing it. I mean, goodness, how many times do kids fall, crash, bump, or do something? Just learning to walk, playing, falling off bikes. It's just constant. And so the likelihood of something being shifted that has the potential to affect the body's ability to heal itself is very high. And so moving ahead, that's the core of chiropractic, is really just raising according to design. It's just ultimately the nerve system is the expression of intelligence through matter, that the brain controls everything in the body. There's a subconscious intelligence that runs everything, that knows what your stomach needs, that knows what your liver needs, that knows what your kidneys need, that knows what your immune system needs, that I don't consciously know, or you don't consciously know, but there's this intelligence in the body that just needs to be expressed through the communication of the nervous system, because ultimately our bodies are designed with everything we need. But here's the thing, when there's an interference or blockage to that designed communication, this is where we see the dis-ease and dysfunction begin. And it's going to happen, I mean, even during pregnancy. I mean, the health of mom's body begins to support that intelligent design or cause an interference to a child's development. So the mentality is supporting function instead of treating symptoms. And that can go all the way back to as a baby's growing before baby's even born, based on how well mom's able to heal and function. And then, of course, just labor and delivery is way easier if mom is well adjusted and the hips and the pelvis are moving well and the musculature is balanced. Everything is so much easier. So one thing that can happen for the children itself is not just when a bone breaks. You know, babies are often born with a seemingly non-traumatic birth, may also have an interference that occurred in utero. So this concept called intrauterine constraint. If mom's had some tension across the belly on one side versus the other, then that can constrain that one section, and baby sits off to one side a little bit, or there's some tension or pressure down low. Those are caused by pelvic misalignments in mom, and that causes some torque across those ligaments, and that can compromise the baby inside in utero or even during the delivery process. And often for many people, if they've gotten stuck or had some difficulty delivering, it can literally come back to that same situation, that mom could simply just need to get adjusted and get those things moving. And so obviously that's a future thinking. If you're in the middle of the labor, you're probably not gonna find a new chiropractor before the baby's delivered. But just taking a look at that, and really that may be responsible for many structural issues for children as they're born, whether that be cranial bone malformation, craniofacial alterations, or congenital hip dysplasia, can all be tied back to a constraint inside mom. Even a C1 subluxation at the top of the neck due to restriction, even before delivery, can be found, and that can leave a child more susceptible to immune-related issues, to allergies, asthma, or to ear infections. So ultimately, it's not just the broken bones that can cause a problem in a child or shift the alignment. It can be much sooner, much more subtle than that. In fact, then the delivery is the next possible, and often for many children that have found and checked after birth, that there's some level of restriction, tightness, or a misalignment in that region. So the C-section delivery, many people think C-section delivery is actually pretty easy on the baby. It's actually pretty physical. It can actually be pretty stressful on the body. I mean, they can pull the baby by whatever thing they can grab a hold of, pick the baby up and yank the baby out. And so that can be very physical. And so that can be the first subluxation or misalignment problem created in a child simply by being born. Forceps obviously can do that. Pulling like the spoons, or the vacuum extraction can torque on a child's neck as well. And so just to be clear, I mean, doctors' jobs is get the baby out, right? They're doing their job the best that they can. Now, here's the issue though. If you think about it, it's like they'll yank and torque and pull and do all these things, and then they hand you the baby and say, now watch out for the neck. So it's just, wait a minute, let's pay attention to the neck before that. But now if there's any sort of an injury or issue or some sort of problem there, let's check it, and let's see what we can do to realign that and correct that, so that doesn't interfere with problems or interfere with the ability to heal that particular child. And so these restrictions also can lead to a child not developing the secondary curves in the spine. So that forward arc in the neck or the lower back, babies with these misalignments will usually not like tummy time. And many parents will then overuse carriers and bouncers and swings and walkers and the bumbo seats and all that. All that can restrain a child and interfere with the proper formation of secondary curves just simply because of not being able to move around as much. And so just make sure that there's plenty of tummy time and make sure there's plenty of opportunity for kids to begin to develop those as they're on their belly, tilting back their neck, or as they learn to crawl, that lower lumbar, low back arch can start growing and developing as well. One study of over 1,500 babies found that 90% of them had a strain in their neck or their cranial areas after birth. And if this goes uncorrected, it can interfere with their development. Block nerve impulses at the atlas, or the top bone, can lower resistance to infection, especially ear, nose, and throat infections. And another study found that 80% of children are not in autonomic balance, so balance of the nerve system itself between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerve system can cause a sympathetic overdrive, and that can lead to things like hyperactivity and issues with focus or a lack of behavioral or emotional control. That can decrease the digestive responses and decrease the immune responses as well. And so there was another doctor, Dr. Gutman. He was a medical doctor, by the way. And he basically looked at the clinical features of the C1 issue. The blocked nerve impulses there can lower resistance to infection. But he said that when he looked at children, he found that 80% of them are not in autonomic balance, and ultimately related back to that area. He found that 80% of kids had some sort of a problem there. And I've seen 5, 6, 7-year-olds with even a reversed curve in their neck, and it's like, how in the world does that happen? So, man, with all these different things in the birth process and the constraint and learning to walk and crawl and fall and bikes and kids and brothers and sisters wrestling with them and just accidents and stuff like that happen. And just check and see if there's a misalignment or subluxation in a child's spine. And then if there is, just correct the problems and maintain the spine just like you would maintain teeth. Check and see if there's a cavity before it hurts. It's the same mentality for kids as they grow. Now, there are some warning signs that may happen if there is a problem. Now, they're not always warning signs, just like there are not always warning signs of a heart problem before the heart attack. There may not be warning signs of subluxations in a child's spine. However, there are some that are pretty strong indicators that there's an issue. For example, the inability to latch on for breastfeeding, favoring one side, acid reflux, constipation or excessive gas, sleeping issues, respiratory stress, or recurring ear infections. Any one of those are warning signs that there can be a problem in the spine in the child. And so ultimately, it's just like if the check engine light comes on in your car, you want to find out why. It's the same conversation. And so the big question, or thinking about it, is can the body adapt, right? Because we all deal with stresses, whether that be stresses of food or stresses of toxic burdens or chemical things in a lot of medications, or just the amount of doses of vaccines that the children are recommended these days. You've probably noticed that there are some kids who can handle more things than others, or handle not doing things, whereas another kid seems to be able to do just fine. So, for example, why can one child have a reaction to a medication or a reaction to a vaccination and have an extreme response, whereas another child can have a full dose of those things and seemingly have no reaction at all? It's like why can one kid eat McDonald's and sugar and rarely be sick, yet another one eats gluten-free, organic, raw food or whatever, and yet still seems to have all kinds of allergies, asthma, or things like that? Ultimately, it's all about the body's ability to adapt to those stressors. Does that make sense? So there's ultimately the body's ability to adapt to the stress. And the body's ability to adapt to the stress is controlled via the nerve system. So the brain through the spinal cord out to the nerves. So the nerve system, your body's stress response responds to stress. And so it's all about that communication back and forth, so that we can combat the daily physical, chemical, and emotional stresses placed on it. So I'll give you one extreme example, just kind of put this into perspective. If you take a look at the side view of the neck, you can see the children's curve there, and you can see the jaw and the head. And so that C-shaped curve, that's essentially a normal, healthy curve. And this is these are twins, actually. So same genetics, same parents, same everything. Both received the same medical care. What had happened, obviously, there was something that created a subluxation, a misalignment in the spine of one child, whereas the other one was essentially fine. One of these children was essentially neurotypical, and the other one actually regressed into autism. And so one of the things to recognize is this is a huge factor for the body's ability to adapt to whatever stresses the body's dealing with. And so basically the subluxation was a limiting factor in that. It just was not able to adapt to the different stresses that were happening there. And so these two kids, same doctor, same vaccine schedule, same foods, breathe the same air, same genetics, identical twins for crying out loud, but only one regressed into autism. Now to be clear, am I saying that the subluxation caused the autism? No. What I'm saying is that the subluxation will interfere with the child's ability to adapt. And so really, regardless of symptoms, diagnosis, or history, what the one system that needs thorough, specific, and scientific evaluation in every child and person is essentially the spine and the nerve system. It just comes down to that. That's why the core of chiropractic comes down to checking those things, not necessarily treating of a symptom, but just check to see if it's healthy. So oftentimes babies are adjusted since they're born. And so this is Dr. Erin Zovath, and what she's doing is she's adjusting the newest little baby there. But babies often just melt. I mean, just a little bit of physical pressure up into whatever misalignment there at usually the first bone or two, and just a little bit of pressure, a little bit of wiggling of the hand in the right direction, just a little bit of direction of pressure, and then the bone literally just glides over like it melted. And often babies, whenever I adjust them, when they're really little, they'll just very, very subtle, very, very lightly will release, and then the neck just almost like it grows. Everything just super relaxes, and it's almost like this extreme look of bliss on the baby's face, and just super relaxed responses, and it's wonderful. And so ideally just checking at birth to see what's going on. If there are already issues, then they can be addressed then to minimize any negative effects on the growth and development of the child. And so what happened is in Dr. Erin's little one, there was basically, she said that they weren't able to latch on the left side, and after adjusting, very light pressure, nerve interference released, and he immediately fell asleep for about 45 minutes. So when he woke up, then he was able to latch without any issues. And so many things can begin to change just by finding whatever issue and working on it. And so it's so easy. But you can start chiropractic care very young. Study in the Journal of Pediatrics, there's a significant utilization of chiropractic care in the United States. An estimated 30 million pediatric visits happen annually in the United States. So this is not a fringe thing. This is very, very common. Pediatric chiropractic is safe and gentle, and is not only restoring health, but more importantly, working on prevention of other problems from ever developing. And so ultimately, just learn the responsibility to take care of their life young sets the standards for the rest of their life. Now, when it comes down to toxins, we are just in a different world. Have you ever tried to read the labels that are on certain things like household cleaning products, or just even on some of the foods that are in the grocery store anymore? It's just a different world now. And unfortunately, it's generational as well. One of the things that they're finding is that toxins that are banned more than 30 years ago are now being found in children because of the blood connection to mom as they're growing. And so just kind of break this down for you. There are about 4 billion prescription drugs ingested in the United States every year. There are 70,000 chemicals that are used commercially. There are 3,000 chemicals added to food supply. 10,000 used in food processing, preserving, and storage. And what's now happening is the EPA is starting to look at our indoor homes and finding out that they're about 5 to 100 times more toxic than the outdoor air, where pollution is a concern. And so brominated flame retardant chemicals banned in 2004 have started to be found in the bodies of newborn babies in the U.S. And so many of these things are just all over the place. The FDA has approved 3,000 food additives, preservatives, and colors, and the average person, unfortunately, ingests about 140 to 150 pounds of additives every year. Just craziness. So when we look at this, there was a study done in 2012 by EWG, that's the Environmental Working Group, and so you can go to ewg.org and take a look at the body burden pollution in newborns. And they did a study called 10 Americans, and they took blood samples from 10 Americans who had no direct exposure to toxins. And the reason they had no direct exposure to toxins is because they were still in mama, they were still in utero. And what they found was that 287 chemicals were in the umbilical cord blood going to the baby. So an average of 200 chemicals per baby, 28 waste byproducts, 47 consumer produce ingredients, things like Teflon, Scotchgard, flame retardants, 212 industrial chemicals and pesticides, some that were banned 30 years ago. And so this, I mean, obviously this is extremely dangerous because a baby in utero has no blood-brain barrier. And so the toxins can get right into the brain of the baby. And so babies are most vulnerable to toxins during the 9 months of development because of this. 134 of those chemicals were found to cause birth defects, 154 hormone disruptors, 186 can cause infertility, 130 immunotoxins, 158 neurotoxins, even lead, PCBs, mercury, DDT, and many of those can even lead to motor coordination issues or intelligence issues or things like that. So this is really something that was alarming that we just need to become more and more aware of. And so, man, we just can't avoid exposure to toxins altogether, but obviously there's a lot that we can work harder to minimize ongoing exposure. The more that we learn, the more that we know. But for things we cannot control, we want to help to remove the interference in our bodies that these toxins are causing by detoxing. And so this is an example of a safe way to detox many of those chemicals inside our children. And so if you've got any more questions about this, feel free to contact the office, and then we can communicate a little bit more. But combining this with your child's favorite snack or drink or something like that, a gentle daily detoxification formula targets 2 major organs, the digestive tract and the liver. Fiber-rich apple pectin combined with probiotics promotes regular bowel movements, alleviates constipation, reduces inflammation, and then botanical extracts, things like milk thistle and dandelion, support the liver and gallbladder health to drain those toxins into the gut and then to get out through the bowel as they do that. So super, super helpful. You can get these things on the website on maximizedlivingdrjohnson.com. So that's drjohnson.com. And I'll make sure that there's a link in the video here. But one of the biggest things parents are always asking about is food and nutrition. One of the things to recognize is that unfortunately the amount of nutrients in our food has been declining due to soil depletion and selective breeding. One study compared nutrient content in 12 different vegetables in 1975 compared to 1997, and the average calcium levels dropped 27%. Iron levels dropped 37%, vitamin A levels dropped 21%, and vitamin C levels dropped 30%. Another study found that you have to eat 7 oranges today to get the same amount of vitamin A as your grandparents did. This generation of kids is just so much more exposed to nutrient deficiency and to toxins in this world than we ever did in our childhood, as well as our grandparents or our parents did when they were growing up. So man, they need all the help that we can give them. They deserve it. I mean, they're our babies. So we want to do as much as we can to not pack negative things in just the kids' lunch. So things like Lunchables, I would encourage you to just look at the label, read the ingredients, and read the laundry list of things that are in there, some of which you probably will have a hard time pronouncing. Don't put in a bag of chips, don't put in dessert, don't put in fruit drinks, because fruit drinks are going to have basically just a concentrated amount of fruit sugar without the fiber. And so one of the things that we just need to be very aware of is that most moms gravitate towards easier foods or lower fat foods, which means more and more processed and refinement happening. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're a lot more intentional, because it really, really does make a massive difference. And so what do you put in the kids' lunch? So some sort of protein, some sort of meat. So prepping, so an organic chicken breast ahead of time, for example, cut it into cubes for easy eating. You can throw in some raw cheese, you can throw in some seeds, nuts, some hummus, something like that. For quality carbohydrates, basically vegetables. They're a great source of carbohydrates. Very filling to get high fiber, and you can dip into the hummus or find a healthy dipping sauce that they'd like. Berries, apple slices, pickles, coconut flour wraps. Cutting fruits and vegetables into smaller pieces, kids are more likely to actually eat them. And so that was actually something that, as I was learning to eat vegetables as an adult, because I did not as a child, smaller was easier. So kids can learn the same way, just kind of baby steps moving forward. And make sure they've got plenty of good fat. So things like sliced olives, hard-boiled eggs, sprouted seeds, avocado will very much be helpful for long-term energy. Fats are great sources for long-term energy. And as far as liquid, and water makes up 70% of your body, so it should make up the bigger part of our diet. So just being strategic about these things will make a massive, massive difference for the fuel, for the energy and focus to be able to learn and to be able to fuel healthy growth and development for our children. So let's talk about just a little bit of shopping tips. One simple thing is just to plan and save. The more that you plan, the more strategic you can be, the more money you can save. So if you make a meal plan, a shopping list, use the food that you have and the deals you find in the store, ads and coupons. So the more that you plan, the more you'll be able to do that. And then add more fruits and vegetables to the meal plan. Fill half the plate with fruits and veggies. You can get your 5 to 9 servings a day for about the cost of a bus ride in most cities. So a bus ticket is about the same price of getting our 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables. So ultimately, it becomes very inexpensive doing it that way strategically. You can have beans in your meal plan, things like that. Beans instead of meat for a couple of dinners a week is one option. That's a lot of protein for a lot less money. I'm not necessarily saying you need to go towards a vegetarian option. I'm saying, hey, that's an option. But ultimately, just skipping processed foods like frozen pizza, cookies, soda, they usually cost more than the fresh, healthy food. Canned foods are convenient, but fresh or frozen is ideal, and you can lower your exposure to a lot of the toxic chemicals and preservatives and processed aspects when you do that. And so it ends up making it a whole lot cheaper shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, excuse me, and just ignoring the middle section with all the characters on labels and box and bag foods and things like that. At home, man, cook and freeze. So make a large batch of something and take a look at the recipes we have on a website, and save money by cooking at home more and eating out less. And that's a great way to be able to afford better quality ingredients. And store food properly, throw less away, and very much grow your own. I mean, you don't need a backyard. I mean, literally just a few containers, sunny window, little soil, and then community gardens are often free. I do know that there are some in our town. You can take a look at that, or there are farmers markets. If you're going to grow some, try simple things like cherry tomatoes or lettuce, simple things like that. You can also check out ewg.org/good-food. So at the store, stock up on your basics to save money. Spot bargains on the fresh fruits and vegetables. Compare the labels. Take a look at things. Healthier foods usually have less trans fat and less sugar and things like that. Like I said just a minute ago, look for deals at the farmers market. Man, some will give you $2 worth of produce for every dollar you spend. So just a huge amount of savings can happen just being strategic there, especially as the weather warms up. There will be a lot more options to do that. So just kind of a shift in focus. Here's some things not to get at the grocery store. Things like salad dressing. Salad dressing in the store has 12 to 20 ingredients and adds 100 to 200 other calories to your dinner. Just learn to make some homemade dressing, 3 or 4 ingredients instead. There are a ton of recipes available. And yes, the pre-shredded cheese is convenient, but did you ever wonder why it doesn't melt? Companies that make those bags cut costs by adding non-cheese fillers, including wood pulp. Often they also add anatomycin, which is basically an antifungal, antimicrobial into it. And so a lot of the pre-grated cheese will have functional antibiotic in it. So basically just get the block and create your own cheese. It just takes a few minutes, or have the kids do it. It's a good arm workout for the kids. A large amount of processed food dates are artificially short, so the grocery stores have to reorder more. Putting a new expiration date on expiring meat is what they do before putting plastic wrap on it. So deli meats are just something that you don't want to get at the grocery store. I mean, there are more naturals. Take a look at the ingredients and go from there. But having stuff made at home is so much better for you. So guacamole, hummus, salsa, things like that are really easy to make. It's a whole lot cheaper. You can make a large amount without the additives that many of them have. And then another thing that you can do, few people buy exotic fruits, so it stays a lot longer between rotations. If you like unfamiliar things, go to a specialty market you can trust. So you don't need to get the exotics in the grocery store if you can avoid it. So when we take a look at just the reality that we're missing so many nutrients, even when we do eat better, even when we do eat well, we just miss so many things. So especially for kids, getting a quality multivitamin like the Max Kids multivitamin is huge. And one of the things that I found in looking at children's vitamins, most of them have added sugar, which we know tanks the immune system, so that's awful. And then lots of them have added colors and other preservatives and other things that I wouldn't want to put in foods at all. Man, so many of those things. In fact, some of them actually have, like Flintstones vitamins, which I used to have whenever I was little. They actually have aspartame in them, believe it or not. So just crazy amounts of processed things in most multivitamins. So you don't want to just go out and buy the cheapest vitamin at the store, because you can be putting other toxins in that. So get a quality one like this. And then the omega and D3 is super helpful because most kids don't get enough of the healthy omega-3 anti-inflammatory fats. And then vitamin D3 is also a fat-soluble vitamin, so it makes it more bioavailable here. And then that's the sunshine vitamin, vitamin D3, super immune system focused. There's so many things that it does, from healthy bones, teeth, immune system, learning, reasoning, so much for the brain. Vitamin D3 does so many things. It's also essential for the absorption of nutrients. But ultimately, the sun exposure converts cholesterol in our skin into vitamin D. And so if we don't get enough sunlight, then it's next to impossible to have enough vitamin D3. So just supplementing. The average adult, just saw an article the other day, said in testing that they need to consume 8,000 IUs per day of vitamin D. So we just need to make sure we get a ton of that. And obviously that's going to be a little bit smaller for the sizing of a child, but making sure that we get enough. And those things can be tested too. Then of course mom and dad too, because if we haven't been eating very well, and even if we have, we miss stuff. So we want to make sure that we get quality nutrients in the system. And so these are full spectrum. These are some of the best multivitamins I've ever seen. So great stuff in here. So a couple of specific herbs for male support as well as for female support. So making sure that you get good stuff there as well. And so when it comes down to mindset, there is a vast array of things that we need to do to really just change the way that we're thinking and change the way our kids think and the way that they grow up. Man, just learning things that I wish I'd learned a long time ago, right? So the positive family environment, so no excuses. And so if oh man, just so many layers of this stuff. The never give up mentality, the no excuses, the work hard, the take care of yourself and be impeccable with your word. Do what you say you're gonna do mindset. And then even teaching scheduling and war planning from a very young age can be super helpful to begin to create a rhythm of being effective with your time in life. And so you can literally pull up a Google Calendar and lay that thing out there. But just a reminder of these are kind of our family values. If you want to utilize that, I would highly encourage you to decide what those things are for your family, and really make them clear. Repeat them like crazy, whatever it is that you want your family, especially your kids, to learn. So put it on the wall, put it over the door, put things everywhere that you want them to learn. So things like mindset, like gratitude, things like scripture reference. From a Christian perspective, there's scripture that you can put up. There's so many different layers of things that we want to make sure that we're nurturing that type of home environment, being a place of growth, a place of encouragement, place of positivity, to be able to just make the amount of stresses so much better. One of the other things to recognize is that discipline equals freedom. So greater personal discipline leads to a greater personal freedom. If you get stuff done, then you're free, right? And so for many of us, that just starts with waking up early. So to get stuff done. And so imposed discipline is when somebody else makes you do what they want you to do. A self-discipline is when you take control of your life and you push to do the hard things. And you don't have to worry about motivation, because motivation is just a feeling that's going to come and go. Discipline keeps you on the warrior path. So looking at life like it is a battle, like you are a warrior, that you are chasing after it and you are going to accomplish and destroy the enemy as you chase after things through your discipline. That's the kind of warrior mindset that we want to cultivate to be able to get through our days where it feels like the world and everything else is fighting against us. And so financial freedom equals financial discipline. So saving money instead of wasting it. From a food standpoint, food is fuel. So just discipline what it is that you put in your body. Your body's like a machine, like a car. The food you eat is fuel. It's either high octane or it's not. And so the only time to start making yourself better is now, not tomorrow, not next week. It takes a good plan and the discipline to execute it. And so fear is in the waiting. Fear lives in the moment, that powerful moment between you and when you decide you're going to do something and when you do it. So you overcome fear by doing. If you've ever heard the acronym about fear, it's false evidence appearing real. And so often the fear that we feel is holding us back, but not for legitimate reasons. And so ultimately the discipline leads to good actions. And over a long enough period of time, those actions can turn into habits. And then they're so much easier to flow. But it just starts with a little bit of focus in it. Next steps, simple things like getting the nerve system checked. For parents, if you're watching this, you've never had yours checked, you've never had your kids checked, now's a great time to do that. Or if you're already getting adjusted, just make sure that you're getting in the right schedule for your situation, whether that be your current frequency through correction, whether that be your maintenance frequency, or whatever that needs to be. Just make sure that you're taking care of that. Keep the kids moving. Avoid sitting long periods of times and not looking down on the devices all the time. Keeping things up. Another very helpful thing is to avoid screen time for at least an hour before bed. There's this blue light that's emitted from electronics, and it triggers a response in your pineal gland in the brain, and it messes with your serotonin and it messes with your melatonin and your ability to fall asleep and sleep well. So if you get rid of electronics for at least an hour before bed, that's a huge, huge help there. Daily affirmations, things that you want to affirm that are true about ourselves, or things that we want to affirm are completely true. And the better we repeat good things that we want to affirm or practice, then they become more and more ingrained into our, not just mindset, but ultimately they get into our heart. So the things that we want in there, we have to put in there because they don't happen by osmosis, like laying on a book and expecting the knowledge to sink in. We have to actually repeat and do that. Then do some family workouts. Be active together. If at all possible, do that. There's even the Max T3 workouts that are really simple, or get to the gym together, or go on a walk or hike together. Find a sport that everybody likes. Just doing some active things. It's great community time. It's great time for the family to spend together, and just great endorphins, and it's great bonding to be able to do that. Just focusing on better nutrition, not perfect nutrition, but just better. Just take an action step. Just do the next good thing, right? Just one next step. Just reducing the processed foods, or adding in more natural foods, or whatever your thing is there. Throw in the supplements. Make sure that we start getting those things in to supplement the nutrition. And so there's a ton of information that you can have access to. There's a lot of recipes on our website. You can go to maximizelivingdrjohnson.com, and there's a tremendous amount of recipes and things that you can see. There's articles there. There's other patient resources there. You can find out about us and our office. If you're looking for a local doc and you're looking to have the nerve system checked, just click on that request appointment button on the website. And then you can set that up and the staff will get in contact with you. Follow us on Facebook. Check out, we'll send all kinds of articles and post videos and recipes and things up there. Like us on Facebook. If you've been in the office, you haven't left a review, give us a review. Let us know how good we're doing. We'll do the best we can for you. And then our YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe that so that you can see the next things that we're posting up there. So we have the calendar of things coming. We've got some nutrition stuff up there. We've got this one we're doing. In April, there's going to be a Forever Young, essentially living to 100 concepts. We're going to talk later this year about juicing. Their upcoming will be a Heart Smart. There will be some vitamin supplement information, and there's also going to be stress workshops that are coming. So go ahead and like, subscribe and plug into those things. As we look forward, here's one example of a cauliflower mac and cheese, just to tease you a little bit. There are healthy ways to have mac and cheese, and simple things like that as we move forward. So plug in, get the resources, check out the website, Facebook, YouTube, ask us questions, and then hopefully you can begin to move forward for the health of your family, because it's so important. Thank you guys. Ask some questions, plug in, and we'll see you next time.